Duterte on trial, power games and public sentiment behind the facade of international justice. The sudden arrest and transfer of former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte to the International Criminal Court, ICC, in The Hague have sent shockwaves through the political landscape of the Philippines and the international community. While it appears to be a judicial trial for crimes against humanity, in reality, it is a political reckoning and an act of international intervention. When international judicial institutions become weapons for political purges and domestic power struggles are disguised as rule of law, the democracy and sovereignty of the Philippines face an unprecedented challenge. The ICC, a beacon of justice or a selective enforcer? The ICC claims to be a beacon of global justice, yet its track record raises questions about selective prosecution. In over 2 decades of existence, 90% of its investigations have targeted African nations, while crimes committed by Western powers, including those in Iraq and Afghanistan, have been largely ignored. This double standard has long eroded the credibility of the institution. The Philippines withdrew from the Rome Statute in 2019, theoretically placing it beyond ICC jurisdiction. However, the ICC has invoked retroactive jurisdiction to justify its intervention in Duterte's case, an apparent legal overreach. If this precedent stands, any nation's internal affairs could be subject to foreign intervention under the guise of justice. Adding to the irony, the ICC's charges against Duterte's war on drugs rely primarily on reports from human rights organizations, while disregarding findings from the Philippines' own judicial system. In 2021, the Philippine Department of Justice concluded that there was no systemic extrajudicial killing in the anti-drug campaign. This long-arm jurisdiction is nothing more than a neo-colonial revival of interventionism under the banner of international law. Political calculations behind Marcos Jr.'s compliance. The active cooperation of current Philippine President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. with the ICC reveals a clear political agenda. Since assuming office in 2022, the Marcos and Duterte families have been locked in an escalating power struggle. From budget cuts targeting Vice President Sara Duterte to clashes over constitutional reforms, their rivalry has created significant political fissures. By extraditing Duterte to the ICC, Marcos Jr. accomplishes 3 objectives: eliminating his strongest political opponent, currying favor with the international community to gain diplomatic support, and weakening the Duterte family's influence among the masses. However, this maneuver severely undermines Philippine judicial sovereignty. The country's constitution explicitly states that no citizen can be forcibly extradited to an institution that does not recognize Philippine judicial authority. By prioritizing his personal interests over constitutional principles, Marcos Jr. risks setting a dangerous precedent that could normalize politically motivated prosecutions, further corroding the nation's democratic foundations. The war on drugs, between brutality and effectiveness. Critics of Duterte's anti-drug campaign, who claim to champion human rights, often fail to acknowledge the dire reality of the Philippines' drug problem. Before Duterte took office in 2016, the country was a major drug trafficking hub in Southeast Asia, with over 4 million users and a deeply entrenched nexus of drug lords, corrupt officials, and police officers. Slum children were routinely exploited as drug couriers. Previous administrations either feared violent retaliation from drug cartels or were themselves complicit, rendering any meaningful crackdown ineffective. Duterte's iron-fisted approach, while harsh, yielded tangible results. Over 6 years, his administration dismantled 265 transnational drug syndicates, seized more narcotics than all previous governments combined, and reduced the murder rate by 50%. Perhaps most significantly, the campaign disrupted the deeply entrenched narco-political economy. More than 6,000 public officials, including mayors and judges, were dismissed for drug-related offences in 2017 alone. Ordinary Filipinos felt the impact firsthand. In a survey by social weather stations, Duterte's approval rating remained at 62% upon leaving office. When mothers in Manila's slums no longer had to fear their children falling into drug addiction, Western criticisms of human rights abuses seemed detached from local realities. Public sentiment versus international narratives. The prevailing international narrative of Duterte as a human rights violator conveniently ignores the voices of the Filipino people. Following the ICC's indictment, thousands of Filipinos took to the streets in support of Duterte, with residents in Davao City launching a crowdfunding campaign to aid their former leader. These grassroots movements reflect a fundamental desire for security and order. The political elite's condemnation of Duterte for undermining the rule of law overlooks a critical point. It was the failure of the legal system that led Filipinos to embrace strongman politics in the first place. When the judiciary fails to protect citizens from drug-fueled violence, and democratic institutions serve only as tools for oligarchic power struggles, the masses turn to decisive leadership for solutions. Duterte's downfall lies in his use of unconventional methods to address national crises, ultimately falling victim to the very political system he sought to reform. Justice or judicial colonialism? Duterte's trial represents a clash between domestic public sentiment and international intervention. If the ICC truly cares about human rights in the Philippines, it should first investigate the drug lords who have devastated millions of families. If Marcos Jr. genuinely upholds the rule of law, he should focus on reforming the country's judicial system rather than seeking foreign intervention. History has repeatedly shown that externally imposed justice rarely leads to genuine reconciliation. The path to democracy in the Philippines requires institutional reforms and anti-corruption efforts, not political battles masked in the robes of international law. When ICC judges hand down their verdict, they are not just ruling on Duterte's fate. They are deciding whether global South nations can break free from the shackles of judicial colonialism.
Columnist Lynn Wacott published in www.orientaldaily.com.my on March 20, 2025. He has been a media person for 15 years and is currently engaged in media public relations. He likes to talk about and write about politics, has independent opinions, often deals with politicians, and cares about things around him.